Hello, welcome. My name is Alfred Yoron. I'm a South Sudanese journalist and author. I am a former editor-in-chief of Radio Bakhita, also known as Bakhita Radio, a Catholic church-run radio station based in Juba, South Sudan. I'm also a former managing editor of Juba Monthly newspaper. I do the program, the weekly review, making sense of relevant topics and news. It's available on YouTube. And my website, rogeryoronmodi.com, contains my work, journalistic work. You will find also articles I've written. And follow the website and keep in touch with my work. Today, I'm here to talk about my book, Freedom of Expression and Media Laws in South Sudan. The book, full title is Freedom of Expression and Media Laws in South Sudan, Details, Implementation Level, Critiques, and Recommendations for Reform. Being keen as a journalist, over the years, I personally followed the implementation of those laws. I interviewed relevant personnel and representatives of media bodies involved, and I wrote several articles over the years and since on those topics and following up what has been happening. Since the publication of the book, many actions, some reforms have been taken. Today, I will talk majorly about what's in the book, knowing that press and all rights and freedoms are matters that can be improved on through continuous discussions, engagements, debates, and so on. As far as the book is concerned, I believe everyone in South Sudan deserves to know the rights to freedom of expression and access to information in the country. As I indicated in its description, the book explains the laws governing freedom of expression, media laws, and the right of the public to access information in South Sudan, traces their implementation, critiques them, and offers a number of recommendations on how to ensure respect for the right to freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and the right to information in South Sudan in line with the Constitution, international law and standards, and best practices. Two South Sudanese lawyers and one journalist have also written their reviews. It's also available in the book on the about the book part. So starting with a brief introduction, let me say the book contains 4 chapters. It has 203 pages. I also talk briefly about what those chapters include. For a start, let me state the following important laws that I cited in the book. One is Article 24 of the Transitional Constitution of the Republic of South Sudan, 2011. It says the following, that 1, every citizen shall have the right to the freedom of expression, reception and dissemination of information, publication, and access to the press without prejudice to public order, safety, or morals as prescribed by law. 2, all levels of government shall guarantee the freedom of the press and other media as shall be regulated by law in a democratic society. 3, all media shall abide by professional ethics. Those are the 3 subsection under section under 3 subarticles under Article 24. The second is Schedule A, paragraph 45 of the Transitional Constitution, which gives the national government exclusive legislative and executive powers on national information, publications, mass media, and telecommunication utilities. Based on that, the national government enacted 3 media laws: the Media Authority Act, 2013, the Right of Access to Information Act, 2013, and the Broadcasting Corporation Act, 2013. The Media Authority Act provides for the establishment of a media authority with the role to regulate, develop, and promote independent and professional media in South Sudan. That is Section 7, Subsection 1. Also, the Media Authority, that's what the Act says, shall be a regulatory body for the broadcast media and transformation of government and state-controlled television and radio into a public broadcasting corporation. Section 7, Subsection 5. And then another relevant section here is that quote, the authority shall ensure that media freedom and press freedoms in South Sudan, media development and press freedoms in South Sudan are consistent with constitutional and international guarantees of freedom of expression, and shall promote public interest in the media sector, specifically by, as mentioned, several mentions there. Then there's one here interesting, that amicably resolving legal complaints of defamation, incitement to violence, hate speech, and invasion of privacy, unquote. That's section 19, subsection 1 of the Act. Then the Right of Access to Information Act explicitly recognizes the constitutional right of every citizen to access information held by public or private bodies as fundamental to fulfillment of human rights and fighting corruption. That is section 4, subsection 2 of the Act. Further, the Act provides for the establishment of the Office of Information Commissioner with the mandate to, among others, promote maximum disclosure of information in the public interest. Then section 45, subsection 1 of the Act, Right of Access to Information Act, gives the Appeals Board of the Media Authority the power to handle pleas filed by complainant against decision of the Information Commissioner on access to information matters. Then the Broadcasting Corporation Act, it provides for the transformation of South Sudan television stroke radio into South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation, a move towards converting the state media into public broadcasters independent from political or economic control of the government. The SSBC has an overall mandate under the law to provide a range of programming for the whole country that, quote, informs, enlightens, entertains, and serves the people of South Sudan, taking into account their ethnic, cultural, and religious diversities, unquote. And then section 32 of the Broadcasting Corporation Act gives the Media Authority the power to refer to court grounds it believes to be a breach of the Broadcasting Corporation by the Broadcasting Corporation of obligations specified in the law. Sorry. Other citations I made in the book include relevant provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, SSPR, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression in Africa. So in addition to that brief information, I'll talk also briefly about what the 4 chapters of the book include. That is chapter 1, which is titled The Media Authority Act, Intro and Purpose. Chapter 2, The Right of Access to Information Act, Intro and Purpose. Chapter 3, titled The Broadcasting Corporation Act, Intro and Purpose. And chapter 4, titled Recommendations to Ensure Freedom of Expression, Right of Access to Information, and Media Freedom in South Sudan. I also talked briefly about issues that I also recently talked about publicly about promotion of professionalism and formation of professional associations. So the chapter 1, let's start with that. The Media Authority Act, Intro and Purpose. It talks about repeal and saving. This is some of the provisions there, the sections there. The purpose of the Media Authority Act, the authority and application, and guiding principles. The subtopics that there under that chapter that I have included in that chapter, the subtopics are as follows. The Media Authority, establishment and structures. Powers of the Media Authority. Funding and reporting of the Media Authority. Frequency planning and licensing. General licensing conditions. Specific license conditions. Advertisement and technical codes. Breach of license conditions. Media Appeals Board, miscellaneous provisions, criticism of the Media Authority Act versus the Revitalized Agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan, the agreement provides for reforms. So some of the reforms are related to the media. So you also included that. And then you have also the Media Authority versus the media in South Sudan. Then unfulfilled obligations of the Media Authority. Then the Media Authority versus the National Communications Authority. Then blocking of websites. Then the National Security Service versus the media. Then South Sudan and the UN Plan of Action, the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity. And finally, interpretation of terms under the Act. Those are the sub topics there. And then the chapter 2, the Right of Access to Information Act, Intro and Purpose. First, I highlighted that the Right of Access to Information Act, Section 3 provides that the purpose of the Act is to A, give effect to the constitutional right of access to information, B, promote maximum disclosure of information in the public interest, C, establish effective mechanisms to secure that right, and D, provide for incidental matters. So the Right of Access to Information Act, Intro and Purpose, that's the main headline. Then followed the subtopics, Right of Access to Information, measures to promote transparency, exceptions, Information Commissioner, enforcement by the Information Commission, internal review of decisions, miscellaneous provisions, criticism of the Right of Access to Information Act versus the Revitalized Agreement Resolution of Conflict in South Sudan, the Information Commission versus the Right of Access to Information, the Information Commission versus the Media Authority, and interpretations. The last subtopic and that's chapter 2. In chapter 3, the Broadcasting Corporation Act, Intro and Purpose. On the purpose of the Broadcasting Corporation, Section 3 provides that the Act shall promote high quality broadcasting and guarantee the independence of the public broadcasting service, free flow of information, and any related matters in the public interest through the establishment of a South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation, SSBC. So the subtopic there was subheadlines in the chapter of the Broadcasting Corporation Act, Intro and Purpose. Have mentioned establishment and guiding principles, structures and composition of composition and powers of the Broadcasting Corporation, services of the Broadcasting Corporation, funding and revenue of the Broadcasting Corporation, accountability of the Broadcasting Corporation, miscellaneous provisions, criticism of the Broadcasting Corporation Act versus the Revitalized Agreement on the Resolution of the Conflict in South Sudan, achievement and challenges of the Broadcasting Corporation, the SSBC versus migration from analog to digital, the Broadcasting Corporation versus the Media Authority, and finally interpretations. That is the last topic there under that chapter 3. In chapter 4, which is titled Recommendations to Ensure Freedom of Expression, Right of Access to Information, and Media Freedom in South Sudan. That chapter mentioned that in order to ensure the right to freedom of expression, the right of the public to access information, and freedom of the press in South Sudan, the following measures should be carried out. There are 33 in number, and that I mentioned there. The first one is that the National Legislative Assembly should repeal Section 9, Subsection 1 of the Media Authority Act on the process of the appointment of the members of the Board of Directors of the Media Authority, and reform the Act to conform to international law and standards. A new provision should be introduced in the Act, removing the minister responsible for information and broadcasting from the process and allowing only media associations and the civil society to be the ones competent to submit names for appointment to the Board of Directors of the Media Authority, with the President for nomination as chairperson, vice chairperson, and members to the National Legislative Assembly for vetting and approval. Second, the National Legislative Assembly should amend Section 12, subsection 1 of the Media Authority Act, which provides that the chairperson, vice chairperson, or a member of the board of directors of the Media Authority may be removed from office by the president on a number of grounds mentioned in the Act without the approval of the National Legislative Assembly. The Act should be reformed to conform to international law and standards by giving the National Legislative Assembly the power to approve any of the removal. The third recommendation is that the National Legislative Assembly should amend Section 17, subsection 1 of the Media Authority Act, which includes the minister responsible for information and broadcasting in the process of the recommendation for appointment of the managing director of the board of directors of the Media Authority. The board of directors of the Media Authority should be given the power to appoint the authority's managing director without the involvement of the minister and the Council of Ministers, subject only to the approval of the National Legislative Assembly, to avoid undue influence on the Media Authority from the executive branch of government. And then the fourth recommendation is that the National Legislative Assembly should repeal or reform sections 31, subsection 1, section 31, subsection 1, 31, subsection 3D, and 31, subsection 4 of the Media Authority Act, which make the Media Authority budget depend first on the approval of the Council of Ministers and provide that it may also accept grants from the government. The Media Authority should be given the power to table its budget directly to the National Legislative Assembly in line with the international law and standards without the involvement of the executive arm of government. Fifth recommendation is that the National Legislative Assembly should reform Section 19, subsection 1D of the Media Authority Act, which gives the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, government entity or third party, the right to initiate legal procedures by the Media Authority. The Media Authority should be allowed to operate independently and only be accountable to the public through the National Legislative Assembly, in line with the guiding principles set out in Section 6 of the Media Authority Act. So this is an important point, and I would urge the members of the public and journalists included to read this section 6 of the Media Authority Act. The guiding principles there are very progressive. And the sixth recommendation is that the Media Authority should establish the specialized committees and autonomous bodies required by Section 7, subsection 6 of the Media Authority Act, including the Press and Broadcast Complaints Council, Hearing Panel, Media Appeals Board, Legal Committee, Complaints and Monitoring Committee, Broadcast and Frequency Licensing Committee, Public Affairs and Education Committee, Engineering and Technical Standard Committee. This should be able to allow for smooth implementation of the Media Authority Act and the authority's discharge of its obligations. 7, the Media Authority should establish an official internet website where all public documents, including media policies, plans, codes, tenders, and decisions of the authority, shall be posted as required by Section 19, subsection 3 of the Media Authority Act. The 8th is that the Media Authority should produce a schedule of the applicable annual license fees and set out the rates for various types of broadcast media services, and publish on the website of the authority the schedule of applicable annual license fees as required by Section 44 of the Media Authority Act. 9th, the South Sudan National Communications Authority, established under the National Communications Act 2012, should leave the Media Authority to be the one responsible for issuing licenses for broadcasting services, allocate broadcast frequencies, and managing the broadcast frequency spectrum with a view to facilitate the emergence of a commercial broadcast sector, ensuring that broadcasting license conditions are respected by the licensees. Those are the requirements of Section 19 of the Media Authority Act, read together with Section 34(1), 34(2), and 2 of the Media Authority Act, and should be adhered to. The 10th is that the South Sudan National Communications Authority should respect the law and block access to news and opinion websites that they had blocked. I mentioned those at the time, those media houses that were blocked. And still urge people to read the book. So the 11th is the National Security Service brought powers to arrest, detain, and ability to search and seize private property without a judicial warrant, and expansive surveillance powers with no independent oversight or due process should be withdrawn through the amendment of the National Security Service Act. And 12th is that the National Security Service should stop arresting journalists, detaining journalists, closing media houses, removing articles at printing facilities prior to publication, and allow the Media Authority to handle all media issues or refer them to court in line with the Media Authority Act 2013. The 13th recommendation is that the South Sudan government should recommit itself to the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity, and ensure that crimes are not committed against journalists with impunity. 14th, the National Legislative Assembly should reform Section 35, subsection 1 of the Right of Access to Information Act and remove the minister responsible for information and broadcasting involvement in the process of the nomination for appointment of the Information Commissioner and his or her deputy. Media associations and the civil society should have the power to directly submit to the president a list of candidates from which the president shall nominate the Information Commissioner and his or her deputy to the National Legislative Assembly for vetting and approval without the involvement of the minister. The 15th recommendation is that the National Legislative Assembly should reform Section 36, subsection 1 of the Right of Access to Information Act, which says the president may remove the Information Commissioner from office on the recommendation of the minister responsible for information and broadcasting. The argument here is that the National Legislative Assembly should be given the power to approve or reject any removal of the Information Commissioner. So the 16th recommendation is that the National Legislative Assembly should amend Section 6 of the Right of Access to Information Act, which provides that, quote, every citizen shall have the right of access to information, including electronic records held by any public or private body, unquote. The provision should conform to international law and best practices, and the right to access information should be granted to everyone, not just citizens of South Sudan. And other details also, these are matters that continuous discussions, the debate have to be done on. And yeah, the 17th recommendation is that the Information Commissioner should issue a regulation on, among others, modes of pay and maximum fee payable to public and private bodies for cost of production of information as authorized by Section 12, subsection 5 of the Right of Access to Information Act. 18th, a replacement to the Deputy Information Commissioner who resigned in June 2016 should be appointed. The 19th recommendation is that the Information Commissioner should ensure that every public body abides by the terms of the Right of Access to Information Act, including Section 16, which stipulates that every public body shall establish an information office, designate an information officer, and ensure that members of the public have easy access to information concerning the information officer, including his or her name, duty, and contact details pursuant to the provisions of the Right of Access to Information Act. 20th, the Legislative Assembly should amend sections 10, subsection 1 of the Broadcasting Corporation Act, which includes the minister responsible for information and broadcasting in the process of the nomination for appointment of the members of the Board of Directors of the South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation, SSBC. Media associations in the civil society should have the power to directly submit for appointment to the SSBC board a list of candidates to the president for nomination as chairperson, vice chairperson, and members to the National Legislative Assembly for vetting and approval. 21st, the National Legislative Assembly should amend Section 14, subsection 3 of the Broadcasting Corporation Act, which gives the President the power to remove from office the chairperson, vice chairperson, or a member from the board of directors of SSBC without the approval of the National Legislative Assembly. Any of the removal should be subject to the National Legislative Assembly's approval. 22nd, the National Legislative Assembly should reform Section 11 of the Broadcasting Corporation Act by introducing a provision making a person employed in the civil service in government ineligible for appointment to the board of directors of SSBC. 23rd, the National Legislative Assembly should reform Section 17, subsection 2 of the Broadcasting Corporation Act, which provides for the appointment of the managing director of SSBC by the board of directors, subject to the involvement of the minister responsible for information and broadcasting and confirmation of the appointment by the Council of Ministers. The board should have the power to appoint the managing director, subject only to the approval of the National Legislative Assembly without the involvement of the minister responsible for information and broadcasting and confirmation of the appointment by the Council of Ministers. The 24th recommendation is that the National Legislative Assembly should amend Section 23, subsection 2 of the Broadcasting Corporation Act, which requires the South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation to present its annual budget through the minister responsible for information and broadcasting to the Council of Ministers and thereafter to the National Legislative Assembly. The SSBC should have the power to directly submit its budget to the National Legislative Assembly for approval without the involvement of the minister or cabinet. 25th, the National Legislative Assembly should amend Section 23, subsection 8 of the Broadcasting Corporation Act, which provides for the audited accounts together with the annual report of the South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation to be submitted by the minister responsible for information and broadcasting to the Council of Ministers, then the National Legislative Assembly. The SSBC should have the power to directly make those submissions to the National Legislative Assembly. And also, there are many examples of how these points connect to each other, mentioned in the book through the interviews and what included in the book. So this just highlights of the recommendation. This is the recommendations, but I urge people to read the book for further understanding. The 26th recommendation is that the National Legislative Assembly should amend Section 15, subsection 3 of the Broadcasting Corporation Act, which provides that the sitting allowances and other expenses of the chairperson, vice chairperson, and members of the board of directors of the South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation shall be determined by the minister responsible for information and broadcasting in consultation with the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning and approved by the National Legislative Assembly. And the National Legislative Assembly should have the power to determine the sitting allowances and other expenses without the involvement of the minister or the cabinet. 27th recommendation here, there are 33 almost done. So the National Legislative Assembly should repeal Section 23, subsection 4 of the Broadcasting Corporation Act, which says the revenue of the South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation shall be deposited in the consolidated accounts of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. The SSBC should have the power to open its own accounts where its revenue shall be deposited dependent from the government. 28th, the South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation should comply with the Broadcasting Corporation Act, which requires the SSBC to align its activities with the democratic values enshrined in the national constitution and to enhance and protect fundamental freedoms and human rights. And Section 7, subsection 3 of the Act, which enshrines that, quote, the Broadcasting Corporation shall strive, among others, to provide a service that A, is independent from the political or economic control by government and reflects editorial integrity. B, includes comprehensive, impartial, and balanced news and current affairs programming during prime time, covering South Sudan and international events of general public interest. And also another mention is that contributes also to informed debate and critical thought, unquote. 29th, the National Legislative Assembly should reform the Right of Access to Information Act to include functions for the Deputy Information Commissioner. 30th, that the National Legislative Assembly should amend Section 59, subsection 2 of the Media Authority Act, which includes the minister responsible for information and broadcasting in the submission of names of persons to be appointed to the Appeals Board of the Media Authority. The Board of Directors of the Media Authority should have the power to submit the names of persons to be appointed to the Appeals Board, to the President for submission to the National Legislative Assembly for vetting without the involvement of the minister. 31st, that the National Legislative Assembly should reform the Media Authority Act to include requirements and procedures for granting permits to foreign journalists and grounds for rejection and revocation of the same, in line with international law and best practices, to put an end to the Media Authority making decisions on those matters without reference to any law. This has been happening some time back. There have been instances where that happened, that no law has been mentioned, just decisions have been reached without references. The 32nd recommendation is that the terms of the deal between South Sudan government and China on the building of a state-of-the-art broadcasting facility in South Sudan, unquote, and the Chinese offer to support South Sudan in the area of digital migration should be made public. That is a recommendation included there. And the 33rd is that the judiciary of South Sudan should be reformed to operate independent of the executive and adhere to the principle of separation of powers and the supremacy of the rule of law, as that would, among others, guarantee justice to journalists and media houses in case of a resort to the courts. Those are the recommendations there. That is chapter 4, which is the last chapter there. But there's a point I mentioned earlier I would like to talk about media associations, formation of media associations to promote professionalism. So let me start by mentioning that, yes, recently I talked about the same issue, that there are media associations there in the country. You call them unions or organizations, but then you can have many. It doesn't mean that you cannot have many. While journalists in South Sudan prescribe or have membership in some of those organizations or associations, my advice is that, and this is what I'm repeating, I said recently that there's no harm in having many. In fact, the more associations are there, the better for all in promoting professionalism. And the question of professionalism is not just about being in conflict with one another and all this, but some things that there are questions of fact. These are issues of facts also, in the sense that professionalism can prove itself. It doesn't mean to be in conflict with those associations that are there. So the point is that there is this provision under the Media Authority Act, that is section 6, subsection 13N, which says a journalist shall have the right to form professional associations and to promote professionalism through training, education, and writing of code of ethics, and advocate for editorial independence, the rights of journalists, and the rights of an independent media without interference. So here, journalists, I advise journalists that there are key things that as a journalist involved in associations and media bodies, you need to know how those associations operate, what their laws say, their constitution says, and membership and rights and obligations, and how do you how all this work. And you can have many. And I argued also that it's not about having a lot of people in associations. Even small acts, when they are professional, they can also contribute together in improving the whole issues that are related to professionalism and the rights of journalists in the country. So with more ideas, more associations, still they can work, because sometimes some associations are not able to handle certain things at a certain given moment, and the more you have, the better. And pursuing those avenues would contribute a lot in improving those issues that are connected to media and professionalism, the rights of journalists, and even the rights of the public to access information. So those are the points there, and I will still make reference. I think I posted that video where I mentioned those points somewhere here in the. I'll make that available. So in conclusion, what I would like to say is that what I've mentioned here majorly there about the book, what the book has, what is contained in the book, and further reading would help a lot of the people in understanding really, and seeing the examples and seeing how some of this practical part of all the mentions here operate. So the other point is about the fact that all these matters that really needs a lot of engagements, a lot of discussions to improve on them, and continuously people, even recently also I've written several articles that related to those issues of the media. This is as of the current, and still I'll refer you to some of those articles and then see continuously how all this can be improved, even with people in authority, to understand that there is room for improvement in so many of the issues there. And some of those things also are connected wider in the sense that also other people, other countries, and so on are also going through how best some of those issues are best addressed. So my articles are on the public domain, they are available. And then on my website, rogeryoronmodi.com, you will find a lot of my work there. Keep in touch with me. And while I have to make this clear that without endorsing or condemning any of the actions that have been taken in relation to the media at the moment, these are topics, like I mentioned, continuous improvement and discussions. But what I have mentioned here is basically about what is in the book. And again, also discussing with some of the things that will take time to keep engaging and having a lot of discussions about, and as in a democratic society. And this also would be, like I said, keep following my website and the articles that have been there, and also continuously. And there will be other discussions. I will also be having some other discussions on some of those topics that are in the book, public discussions soon, that will also discuss further some of those improvements that can be done, and so on. So once again, thank you very much, and follow the website and also subscribe to this this YouTube channel. That has been about the book in brief, media, my book, Freedom of Expression and Media Laws in South Sudan. Thank you very much. And it's available also on Amazon. I will provide the link. So thank you very much. And those also in East Africa region can find in the bookshops around.